Okay, aloha mai kako, ikaho hana, behea oi, o Cliff Keia. It's me, Cliff. Great to see you, Erynne and Connor. It's nice to be on a virtual get together, especially on different parts of the globe. For those who aren't familiar with the guests here today, we have Dr. Erynne Gilpin, who is of Cree Métis, Celtic, Filipina background and heritage. She's an educator. She's also a doula practitioner, and she's also an outdoor mountain climber, founder of many different organizations. It's great to see you, Erynne. Aloha mai ko. Also, Connor, Ryan, professional skier and also of Lakota ancestry. I'm not too sure where Connor's at now, somewhere in the big mountains. I'm sure getting a lot of the snow on these recent storms up here in the Northern Hemisphere out there on Turtle Island. I'm Cliff from Hawaii here, just wanting to hear some perspective of my native family across the globe. Aloha, thank you for being here, both of you.
Tansei, it's so good to see you both.
Yeah, I think within our time here, this is more of just, I feel, an opportunity for us to get together and share some of our perspectives as Native people and how we maybe don't really necessarily use this word Native or Indigenous people when we go to the outdoors. We're like adventure people. And I feel as a surfer, I identify very much as someone who likes to go out and have fun in the ocean, but do it with purpose. And for me, this, I guess, walk and swim that I try to navigate through society today is the idea of indigeneity and being indigenous. And maybe that's something we can start the conversation off with, is what you folks feel about what it means to be indigenous and what is indigeneity in the outdoor space. Maybe Erynne, you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. It wasn't necessarily something I thought about when I started, rock climbing, but it was something that inevitably would come up when I would be at the crag, when I'd be outdoors bouldering, or even just trying to learn how to climb, within the context of a climbing gym. I think identity and the intersections of like power and privilege and where we're all situated in our own different communities comes up everywhere we go, including our crafts, or including our practices. And in my case, that would be climbing. And so I myself I identify as a mixed Indigenous person. I'm a mixed person. And so I feel very grateful and very blessed to be able to have family members who are Indigenous and family members who are not Indigenous. And it helps me kind of navigate different worldviews and different ways of thinking about relationships to one another, and also relationships to land and to waters. And so through my own kind of emerging lens of indigeneity as a rock climber, for me, it's really all about thinking about my ongoing ancestral, but also future relationships to land and to waters, and how my practice as climbing can also be like a belly button, can also be a site of thinking about future relationships to the land and to waters, and how climbing can really be an avenue for that. I mean, there's so much to say, and I'm sure we'll be able to kind of like spend time to like talk about it all. But yeah, so I really try to think about how our different practices, in my case, such as climbing, can really serve as a pathway into deeper thinking about our, not only our relationships, but also our responsibilities and our belonging even to the lands and or mountains that we may be climbing on or getting to know as well.
That's like so interesting to think about how something as it seems for maybe many that it's just like recreation and it's just going out and having fun and adventuring, but for other people's, it's actually, like you said, that like belly button, that like umbilical cord, which can be used to get back and connected to our mother, on so many senses. And I really love how you explain it that way, because I think when we have an activity or quote unquote sport as a way to get us closer to our mother, it just makes things a lot more fun and maybe more accessible to so many people.
Totally.
Connor, what is your perspective in Mana'o about, this idea of indigeneity across, I guess, the big mountains for you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I really love what Erynne said there, and I really resonate with so much of that. And I see it as that opportunity to connect and make relationship. And for me, the way that I often see that is in the form of stories. When I first was introduced to skiing, it was by my father, and my father comes from Irish heritage. My mother's Lakota, and so I didn't have a cultural context at first as I connected with skiing, but I always got this sense of there's a story happening in this place, and stories have happened in this place. And so for me, it gave me that opportunity to have stories of my own. And then as I was given cultural stories from my uncles, it kind of allowed me to see how I interweave into that story. I would hear a story about the water, and for the first time, I would become a part of it because I'd get to go up there and ski with that water while it's frozen. And where I live, down in the plains just below the mountains, that same water in the springtime is what comes down and it makes the fields grow, and it's the same water that comes out of my tap. And for the first time for me, I got to be a character in that story with the land. And for me, that's really what it became, was seeing myself as a part of the ongoing story that extends long into the past and that my current actions determine the future of. And I found it to just be such an empowering and connective feeling.
Hey, oh yeah, that's awesome to put us in the connection to our environment. And I love it how you talk about you're not just, it doesn't end on the slopes. You shred up in the mountain, and then you go home and you pound water, and you are part of that whole thing. It feels your spirit, your soul, and your body all in the same expression. Oh, that reminds me really of a educator and also an author, Robin Kimmerer. She wrote that book, Braiding Sweetgrass, right? Is that and
Gotta be back somewhere.
yeah, when she talks about the idea of being an Indigenous person, it's not, to paraphrase, it's not really being just from a place, but being of that place. And the idea that it's not enough just to have an intimate knowledge base of this place that we go to, but also the reciprocity that needs to happen, the respect and the engagement. It's almost like it's not maybe something that gets misinterpreted is Indigenous people being seen as having rights to lands, where I always believe as a Kanaka Maoli Hawaiian person that my only right here is to be a steward of the place I come from, and to see how both of you are taking these histories and integrating contemporary recreation, but using the cultural history of each one. It's so powerful. Like we've been up in the big mountains, we've been climbing and scaling these walls, we've been in the surf for thousands of years, but we're inviting the modern application, using, I don't know, cramps and carabiners, or like Erynne, you'll know more than I, when you have to boulder, like the being safe with the pads and stuff, and Connor obviously with like the newest skis and things like that. I think it's just so amazing to see our stories moving forward, and that idea of taking the story and continuing it. We're going to be these ancestors of the future that hopefully they'll look at us as we did our part to help write that.
Totally.
A question I kind of had for you, Connor, is this idea of respect for place. I know you've spoke about it in some of the films you put out. When you connect to a place, it's about the story of the people, it's about the songs. And I watched one episode of one of your films of you saying how you ask for a permit is through your people's song. And it's like we got to get permits for the places we go in contemporary society, but to still see contemporary Indigenous society and maintaining that permission, it's really cool. How do you feel as maybe a newcomer to some snow sport, how do we engage into these permissions or this respect for the place? And does that help you actually score when you go out on your expeditions?
Totally. Yeah, I think it's a huge factor for me in how I approach place. Because the thing that really comes to mind is when you're in the backcountry, there's this constant need to be aware of the avalanche conditions, and it's something that's above and around and below you all the time. And there's sort of this presence of that's always there in your decision making. And for me, I think about like in quantum physics, how they know like an electron under observation behaves differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of think about that level of connection to the environment. And in Lakota, we call that mitakoyasen, all my relations, and feeling very related to like this big power of avalanches and the snowpack around me. And so because I know there's some truth to that feeling of like, this place is as much as I'm being, there and witnessing it, it's witnessing me. And so I think about like, who do I want to be as the place witnesses me? And what do I want the observation of the water, of the snowpack, of those electrons to be of me? And I want that to be gratitude. I want that to be connection. I want that to be respect. And I think that if I put that out, I'll get that back in exchange. And that's something, like having sung a song, having offered a little tobacco, having put in work to protect and clean up a place when it was summertime and the trailhead needed looking after, whatever it might be, like having done something to invest into my gratitude and reciprocity with a place gives me a lot more confidence before I drop into a big line and, my safety is on the line a little bit there. I want to know like this place knows me and knows that I'm here in a good way. And so that's really kind of the goal of mine all the time when I step into those big spaces.
Powerful. That just gave me chicken skin when you're talking about the electrons, because it's like, it don't matter what we are, we all got them. Protons, electrons, and neutrons, that's whether you're talking about the mountain, you're talking about the human. That's I'm down with that. And moving into that same perspective of people and place, Erynne, when you go into these places to climb, I know a lot of your work outside of climbing also involves respect for people and respect for, maybe most importantly, oneself. And how do you feel having a deep understanding of your heritage, of where you come from, your mixed lineage, and also the way you interact as a person with other people? How does that help you to maybe include more of a diverse group as you're going into these spaces? And how does it make you feel more empowered, I guess, to bring different people into these sacred spaces?
Oh man, I'm trying just to hold back because I want to respond to everything that you both are saying, because I'm just like, yeah, these are the best conversations ever. I could talk about this forever. We're just like at the kitchen table. So I mean, what you just said, Connor, resonates so much, and I'm trying not to go off on too many tangents, but to come back to your question, Cliff, I think for myself, I really, I have started to kind of tell myself, the moment that we remember, when I say we, I mean, all peoples, stretched across all islands, stretched across all places, when we begin to remember, or in some cases for people begin to learn that we all belong to the land, and that we all belong to this planetary body, that we call Earth, or that we call, Aske in our own languages. We have different names for. When we remember that we belong to the land, then we can then begin to learn or remember how to belong to each other. And I think there's some real disconnections in terms of how we understand social inequity or social justice or injustice, or difference and division, and all of these different kind of stories, right, that have really divided us and set us apart in these different trajectories. And I think that real connecting piece, I mean, whether it's electrons and protons, if we really kind of get down to it at a spiritual level as well, at least my own teachings are around, you know, those connecting pieces live in our relationship to land and to waters. When we get down to thinking about how we feed ourselves both physically and emotionally and mentally and spiritually. And for some of us, that is through how we are able to access and be on the land and access those moments of, I think, deep introspection and stillness. I don't necessarily think that we live, many of us navigate, you know, societies where stillness is something that is nourished or supported or cultivated in our everyday lives. We're often asked to kind of like wake up and go and wake up and, you know, produce something or, you know, whatever it may be. But I think that could also be something that draws us deeply into what we do as climbers, you know, that when you're scaling these these rocks and you are seeing your little fingertips just holding on to these tiny little crimps, and all you have is your breath, and all you have is your infinite smallness in relationship to the grandness of where you are. It's like those moments of just where it's just you and that, you know, I can't imagine, I don't know, but like you and that wave, or you, Connor, when you're in that like flow. Those are, I mean, like skiing and surfing, maybe you guys can teach me one day. I'm like from the prairie, so I don't really have that. But I mean, for myself, those are the moments that kind of we kind of try to talk about in our diverse communities, because we all have access to those moments. And I think the land provides a space for us, and the earth provides a space for us to either remember, reclaim, or be introduced to those moments of stillness and also really deep connection, which I think is really important in terms of how we are imagining our stories moving forward as well for the next generations who are going to be walking on our planet too.
Oh, everything that you said, I only went rock climbing one time before. And
You told me.
exactly when it was like when I was up there, though I was with a group, when you're just there, and like you said, the breath, that is something that I remember. Like you can almost hear your heart and your breath, and you hear almost like everything. I felt like the veins in my forehead were like pulsing, and like my body was like telling me, like, if you're not taking care of me, I don't know how to take care of you with this huge power that exists around us. And that directly put me into feeling the stone and feeling the wind as it came down the face, and really me wanting to know that within myself, I want to be with people. Like I seem like maybe a loner when I go out and try to catch these waves and, you know, surf alone and, you know, try to like get away from the crowd. But, you know, in those moments of vulnerability, I realize that I do need to be a part of a community somehow, even if it's this community that I'm going on this adventure with. And like you said, that's so amazing that rock climbing does that. But I guess in many different, you know, outdoor spaces, having that malama or care for ourselves can really enhance the experience so much more, no matter if it's skiing, climbing, or surfing. But yeah, this is something that I always look into as an interesting way to share with so many different types of people across the outdoor adventure space is, you know, again, Indigenous perspective, Native lens in adventure and outdoor, inclusivity, indigeneity. It's not like a private club that only Native people have it, or even if mixed people have it. It's like a perspective that exists wherever we come from in our origins, and bringing a little bit of our past to the present. I think it'll really mesh well with those who also have long-standing histories in a place. And how do you feel, Connor, about explaining to those who maybe have this insecurity, or I don't know if it's white guilt or whatever that may be, that we have to be kind of delicate without seeming like we're babying the audiences? How do we include and empower people of many different histories?
Yeah, I think that's so huge, because for me, the thing that stands out is like everything that I talked about in the last two questions, right? Like your connection to the water, your beingness within a place, like that's true for you no matter who you are. Like as a skier, if you live and ski where I ski, like you also ski on the water you drink, right? And what you probably didn't have was that cultural context coming from ceremony of understanding Mini Wichoni, water is life. Like we chose Ani, if you protect this is a good way of life. And that's something that I feel like we have to contribute in this time as Indigenous people, because the traditional ecological knowledge that our cultures are rooted in are scientific fact. And that's something that I think sometimes gets overlooked, because we like to think of science as just like Western science, right? But science is really the application of the scientific method, right? Of making a hypothesis and experimenting with that and seeing what the results are over time. And Indigenous people in our places have done that for so long that our science is so established that it's a part of our culture. And so that's the gift that we get to have in knowing these places in that way. But it's not true for you if you aren't Indigenous. Like the ecosystem, works the same way for all our relations, for all beings, whether we're the two-legged ones, whether we're the four-legged, the wings, whatever kind of creature we are, like the bones of how an ecosystem works for us all the same. And that's especially true for human beings, no matter what our place of origin or our skin color or whatever our cultural background is. We still get to be rooted in that truth of like, I breathe in the air, that air came from the tree, I'll exhale, that tree will inhale, and then just like that, I'm bonded to this place. And that's true no matter who you are. And I think that is a really fun thing to celebrate and have, uplifted more as we bring in more Indigenous perspectives in the outdoor world.
Speaking of perspective and celebration, Erynne, with your work as not only an educator and a climber, a doula, but also a storyteller, what are some of the things that are ways to celebrate these stories of what Connor's talking about? And we are all connected to the earth, no matter what life form we are.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so much of what Connor said reminded me of so many pieces around stories, not just as stories, but also as systems of governance, of systems that carry forward knowledge. And I'm starting to see stories within, the climbing world or the outdoor world, whether it's industry or otherwise, who are kind of starting to dip their toes into this idea of, connection with place and connection with land in a way that's a little bit deeper than the next adventure or the next thrill or whatever it may be. And so I can see that within communities, people are recognizing that craving or that I think that calling to go a little bit deeper. And I'm sure that's also what so many of us can relate to in what we do as climbers, surfers, skiers, and otherwise, is we crave that place that we can kind of go deeper, both in ourselves, but also in our surroundings and, in the land and on the water. But I mean, for myself, this is something that I've started to learn the more that I've had the opportunity to learn my language, Nahiawewin. And there's a saying, and it's and it means essentially that our knowledge as a people comes directly from our relationship to land. And when we consider knowledge as a system of values or a way to learn how to be in relationship with one another, that reflects reciprocity and balance and all of these different things, then we recognize that if we want to learn and go deeper in our learning, as a species, as a community, as a people, we need to return first to that place that we come from. And for us, that is the land, that is our connection, or that belly button to our planet, right? And so finding those moments that kind of like reconnect us through, I mean, as a doula, I see everything. I start to think of everything through birth. I'm like, like what can represent the umbilical cord, like those moments. But I mean, considering stories not just as stories, but really for vehicles for how I think we can envision our futures as well. I'm a huge sci-fi fanatic. I love sci-fi. That is like my happy place. And I'm always so excited to think about, okay, let's reimagine what there is. Let's reimagine beyond whether it's like colonial relations or otherwise. Let's, what are the places and what are our responsibilities as members of community to reimagine our way back and our way forward in relationship to our planet? That's a little bit more hopefully intimate than perhaps what we are seeing around. And that's where I really do recognize the importance of place-based knowledge systems, of languages that carry that meaning. Connor and yourself, you're both speaking in your language, and I'm sure each word that you're saying is not something you can translate directly to English. It's a whole story involved in those words, right? And that's kind of, I think, my entry point into understanding my own worldview into relationship and through land is through those languages as well. So I think just like what Connor said, opening those spaces to invite in and tatawa, make more space for more of those perspectives and languages is also just so important.
Oh, awesome. I when you're talking about that idea of our Leo, our language, and we're talking that, it's just, how do you explain it? It's the same thing I would say what they call like the Jerry or the Gobi or the Pau and the Stoke and the Tube and all, like we even in outdoor, we have our own language that people have no idea what we're talking about. Like, oh, who's this kook? And you're like, what is that? Like, but oh, awesome. I know we could go on for days in this type of conversation, and hopefully next time we have it, we'll be live in person, at least together, and maybe, people can come along too. So, with that, I mahalo ya oko. Thank you so much, you folks, for being here today. And mahalo to the Sea Change Session Summit for allowing us a safe place to speak from a native lens on how we can engage more in the outdoor space. So mahalo nui. We'll see you folks soon.
Bilama yellow, Daksha.